Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Although I say as always, but we've had some people subbing in.
Yeah.
Mark has done a solo episode. I've done some solo episodes. We've had some guests. So I say that to say thank you to all of the folks who have subbed in over the off season. That was a conscious choice on Mark and I's part to let ourselves get some weeks away, to maybe get some other voices on the show, all that kind of stuff. So thank you to all those folks who have done so, especially over the last several weeks. I know I mentioned it on a show at some point, but if you didn't hear it, I was out of the country for a few weeks. So some of the episodes you've heard over the last few weeks were pre-recorded. After which I have come down with a little bit of a cold. So if I sound a little extra nasally today, that is why, but we are plowing through. I feel fine, just sound bad. So that's my lot right now. So I will try to minimize the sniffling into the microphone, but no promises. First off, Mark, it feels like it's been a while. I haven't seen your face, and
welcome back, buddy.
Feels like thank you, thank you, Mark. We won't put this out on Front Street. Mark and I both a lot of changes and moving pieces in our lives these last few weeks, and it's part of the reason why it's been good that we've had some episodes already ready to roll. So, but it is good to be back and to chop it up again, kind of in real time. As we're recording this, the weekend is coming out, so we're gonna talk some fall ball, and
lots of it going on.
There's a lot of it going on. So, if you've not been keeping up, shame on you. Mark has been doing these notebooks the last few weeks that have, been little wrap-ups of what's happened in the exhibition world, because those are in full swing. They're really informative. They're nice little snapshots, obviously, all with the caveat of you can't read too much into anything that happens in fall ball, but I do think you can. I like to say you can get some hints in fall ball, and so take those with a grain of salt, but they can be little tasty grains of salt. Because sometimes what happens in fall ball does mean something. You just can't tell which is which sometimes. So,
where I like to focus on there is what does the lineup look like, and who are your key reserves? And if you play two games, right, does one guy start one place and one guy start the second game? So there's competition there. Where if one guy starts both games, you're feeling pretty good about his status at least at the moment. And then which pitchers are getting used, right? Who starts and who goes 2 innings versus one? What do they really want to see? I think you can, some of it is, conjecture. But I think others, you can kind of get a feel for who coaches have confidence in, maybe who they want to see a longer look at. Those kinds of maybe hidden parts of the fall that are so vital to find out what your roster is going to look like when you finally get there, for opening day. And, Arkansas was a team, they played 2 exhibition games. I know you saw them earlier this fall. We've seen Missouri have a couple of theirs. Ole Miss has been in action. They've got another one coming up this weekend. Just Vanderbilt, a lot of different teams getting going. And then pretty much everyone other than Tennessee, who's going to play some inter squad in Chattanooga and then in Nashville. Everybody's going to play some outside competition, and I do feel like that certainly helps, especially if you can get a decent amount of fans in the stands, and you see how people respond to that. You see what happens when the jerseys change color, that sorts of thing. So lots of fun stuff to talk about, and can't wait to dive into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with you mentioned Arkansas and Missouri. Let's start there just because those are teams I've seen with my own eyes so far this fall. First off, fall reports are out on both of those teams, so go check those out on the site if you have not already done so. We've, maybe 8 or 10 fall reports so far. Now they're really going to start coming hard and fast the next couple of weeks as fall ball has really started in earnest. So keep tuned in for those, but Arkansas and Missouri have posted. Let's start with Arkansas, which, by the way, you mentioned they've played some games. And a couple of good ones. They played Little Rock, obviously in-state team. Chris Curry, the head coach at Little Rock, former assistant for Dave Van Horn at Arkansas, so they've got a good relationship. Also, team's pretty doggone good. I saw that team as well. I have a fall report out on them as well. And Arkansas handled them pretty well, 8-1 in that game. But then Dallas Baptist was the second team Arkansas played, and they beat them 5-3. So a couple of impressive performances. Again, you don't want to read too much, but obviously winning those games better than losing them if you're going to play them. So positive stuff there. I think a couple things stand out about Arkansas for me, Mark, from having seen them. One is that, man, there is a wide range of outcomes, in my opinion, for what their rotation is going to be.
Yeah.
Because if you ask me today what the three guys are, I don't know what order they'd be in, but if you ask me, the three guys right now are probably Gabe Gackle, Cole Gibler, and Hunter Dietz.
Yeah.
And all three of those guys are extremely talented.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff is great. The off-speed pitches that are put away and the fastball velocity, all of it's there. But in that group, you've got guys, frankly, who have all dealt with like whether it's injury stuff or just like freshman wall when they were freshmen, like none of them have had like the easiest go of it. You've got Gackle, who's probably the most proven, actually not even probably, he is the most proven, but he was in the rotation last year and it went okay, but it wasn't great. He ends up back in the bullpen. So can he be better this time around? And
he was so much better once he went to the bullpen.
100%. And so is it just that he kind of is a reliever? Like that might be it. Or did he get better and he's more ready for it this time around? I would also believe that, obviously. So you've got that. You've got Cole Gibler, who, again, had a good year last year, but it's like, okay, now he's going to be asked to do a little bit more. Yeah. And is he ready for that?
And then he's such an uncomfortable at bat, man.
He is.
How does that look spread over a few times through the lineup? But go ahead.
He is. Yeah, and he looked great with Team USA. Like I talked to some folks around Team USA this summer, and they didn't really expect him to make the team. I don't think this will surprise anybody. Like when they invite the 50 guys or whatever to Team USA, they kind of know who the top 20 are. And there might be 5 or 6. I don't know exactly how many they put on the roster. Maybe it's 30, whatever. The last third of the guys or quarter of the guys are what's up for grabs. And they didn't necessarily anticipate Cole Gibler being one of those guys. And he was. That's how good he pitched. So it's there, but they're asking him to do something he's never done. And then with Dietz, it's a guy who's been injured from basically the minute he got on campus.
Yeah.
And but it's important to remember, and this is why the ceiling is there. When he came to Arkansas, he was kind of the 1B to Gackle's 1A in terms of high quality incoming freshman pitchers. And it's just because of the injuries, he's never gotten there. So I wouldn't be shocked if this is an elite rotation. I also wouldn't be shocked if it's kind of a middle of the pack rotation that struggles at times and has to find its feet. And it turns out that one of these guys is actually more of a reliever, and then somebody else gets nicked up. And chances are one of them is going to be awesome because you get 3 shots at a dartboard with 3 guys with awesome stuff. Like one of them is going to be great probably. But what are the other 2 going to do? So I'm fascinated by that. That's probably my number one thing. Yeah. And then it's the outfield for a couple of reasons. One is, you're breaking in some new guys. They replaced the entire outfield again, second year in a row on that. You've got Micah New, the Marshall transfer in center field. He's pretty much locked in. But then in left and right, you're talking Zach Stewart, transfer from Missouri State, Damian Ruiz, transfer from Lamar, Hihio Aloy, they think, could play the outfield. He's dealing with a little bit of he got a slow start to fall, dealing with an injury that he picked up in Cape Cod League. So he's working through that. And then Britton Clark is a freshman who, really has jumped onto the scene and has been a guy that's opened some eyes this fall with his performance. And it's probably not a name that was on anyone's lips to start the fall, but that's the beauty of it, is guys play their way into that. And so he's kind of elbowed his way into the conversation. So there's a million other storylines. And if you go read the fall report, you can read about them. But those are the 2 that I think stand out to me right now, is just the variability of what the rotation is going to be and the outfield competition.
Yeah. Well, the 3 guys you mentioned as potential weekend starters, I mean, there's a lot of volatility there. They could be amazing or you could have some issues. And I think the reason I bring that up is you have a guy like Colin Fisher who started, the DBU, he started Which game he started? He
I think
started Little Rock game.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so I think he is, maybe his ceiling isn't as high as those three guys, but his floor is higher. And I think there's a lot of confidence, with him going in there. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up, getting in there if somebody struggles or somebody is just not feeling it, or maybe it's a matchup thing, right? I do think that there's a place for him and him there. I'm eager to see what happens late in the game, who ends up being the stopper. If it is a stopper by committee, there's certainly a lot of options. A guy like, Ethan McElvain from Vanderbilt, super talented, just never has quite found the consistency. Steele Eves has been a guy who pitched well during the fall. He's going to have a role, just a question of what it looks like. And then Parker Coyle came back, a guy who was drafted. What's his role going to be? Is he going to be a long man? Is he going to be a starter? Maybe he's pitching late in the game. Certainly a veteran guy with a lot of moxie. I do think that's going to be the strength of this Arkansas team, because they've just got so much velocity and so many options to pick from that they're going to find the right combination. And it might be, and I expect it'll look different in May than it does in March. Offensively, I think the lineup, last year's lineup was just so good after we had years of Arkansas doesn't have a great offense, and then last year's blew away expectations. This year they've got something to prove. They didn't really do a whole lot offensively against DBU. I think they scored all their runs in one inning. Hit a couple of bombs to make it happen. I do think that's going to be the question for Arkansas going forward. Again, really talented roster, lots of pieces to pick from. Not sure that we know what that lineup's going to look like. You mentioned the outfield, and certainly the infield's going to look interesting too. Carson Brumball's a freshman who could find his way in and be a key piece. And then with Nolan Souza, who's injured, once he returns, he was a starter at second base, and Cam Kojal was kind of floating around different places. What does that lineup look like, once everybody's healthy and they're able to put what they feel in their best nine out there? I think, Arkansas is certainly not the only team, having those discussions. And honestly, they probably have more places decided than some of their peers in the league, because there's a lot of volatility at some of the other contenders. But that to me is what I want to see from Arkansas. Ryder Helfrich could be the best catcher in college baseball this year. He's certainly on the short list. We mentioned Kojal, who had a tremendous year as a sophomore, and now he's a junior, draft year. What does that look like? He certainly hit for power last year. Does he take that, just as he did from freshman to sophomore? Is there another step in there to become, one of the best offensive players in the league? So there's a lot of questions, but also I'm kind of bullish on where Arkansas is. I don't really expect them to take a step back. I think, when you talk about the top teams in the SEC / country, you're going to have Arkansas in that mix. And based on, what we talked about, how the rotation shakes out, how much consistency you get out of that, and also what the lineup ends up looking like. I think that's, obviously what's gonna drive, if Arkansas can finally get back to Omaha, go back-to-back years, and then once they get there, be a legitimate title contender, which they were last year. They just ran into LSU.
Yeah, I think it's been big for them, to the extent you can glean anything from the fall. Like, I think it's been big for them that TJ Pompey has swung the bat pretty well.
Yeah.
A guy who, if it's not Brumbaugh, it could be Pompey at shortstop. I think more likely he's the third baseman with Brumbaugh at shortstop, but a guy who has a lot of talent, dealt with injuries at Texas Tech, is looking to kind of finally reach his immense potential. And he seems like the type of guy where, depending on how good he is this coming season, is going to have a lot of bearing on how good Arkansas is, I think. So, because he's going to be in the lineup every day. Yeah, for sure. Missouri's interesting for all the reasons they've been interesting the last 2 years, which is just like, going into last year, it was like, are they going to be better? And the answer was they weren't, right? It's the same question this year. It's just like, but now improvement seems almost inevitable. I mean, gosh, I hope so for their sake.
Yeah.
It seems almost inevitable. It's just a matter of how much. And I will say this, on the position player side in particular, they're just so much more talented. Now, the guys they brought into the portal, there was all a reason why those guys were in the portal. But when you look at, Cam Durden, who was the player of the year in the Appy League over the summer from Wichita State, Yamal George, who was at Texas A&M last year, Donovan Jordan from Texas, Jace Woida from South Carolina, like those are all SEC quality players. But again, there was a reason they were, Yamal George just didn't quite find a role at A&M. Jace Woida hit for some pop, but just didn't hit consistently enough. He's a little bit positionless defensively. Donovan Jordan had injuries at Texas. So there's a reason they were all in the portal and they were available to Missouri. But those are the types of players that Missouri is going to need to get out of the portal if they're going to be more competitive. So those are guys that stand out to me. And then they have a pretty interesting freshman class of pitchers. Richie Swain is a guy who was committed to Mississippi State, and then kind of in that turnover of the coaching stuff at Mississippi State with kind of before Brian O'Connor took over, he kind of got caught in between. And so he switched his commitment over to Missouri. And the other X factor there has been that with Drew Dickinson as the new pitching coach there, like there are some guys who have come with him or come because of him. And so the big name is Sam Rosand, who is a guy out of the DC area. Looks the part, 6'2", 230 pounds, quick arm, touched 96 already. Like he's a guy who committed to Drew Dickinson at Virginia as a freshman in high school back when you could do that. And he followed Drew Dickinson to Missouri. So, and again, Virginia had a, coaching change. So there was that too. But so it's the type of freshman arm that frankly, Missouri hasn't had in a while. And so, if a couple of those guys turn out to be ready to go, I think that could be a real game changer. And then of course, it's just how much does the pitching improve with Drew Dickinson as the pitching coach in general? I think he's a really good hire. I wrote about that in the fall report. Whether you look at his time at Virginia, he went to Omaha a handful of times. You don't do that by accident. And then he was the pitching coach at Illinois, which I think is important on a couple fronts. One is it's the same regional footprint as Mizzou. Right. That helps. But then also that's a program that within the Big Ten has to do more with less. They are not the most moneyed or most facilities rich program in the Big Ten, but when he was there, he consistently developed top of the Big Ten pitching staffs. That's the same kind of thing he's going to have to do at Mizzou. That's no secret. So how much impact he has is going to be important. And I think that's part of what we saw with, Mizzou's played a couple of games. One was against a lower divisional team in Central Methodist. So hard to know what to glean from that, but they also lost to Iowa 15-7. And we know Iowa's a good program, but I also wonder how much of the 15 runs allowed was they're going to be leaning on some of those talented freshmen and also and pitchers that are having to do things with a new pitching coach they haven't been asked to do before, just the transition. So we'll see, but this team is more talented. That is flatly true. How much does it matter remains to be seen. And that's just going to have to be the question that Mizzou answers come the 26th season.
Yeah. I mean, last year they struggled so much after getting injuries to the pitching staff and there just wasn't enough depth. So sounds like this year there's at least going to be more options, more hope. Should everybody's get someone hurt at least for a little bit of time. So that's not a death sentence, right? If that does happen, I am interested to see. I mean, some of the returning guys from last year, like Kellen Brink and Devitt and Pimental, who missed the year, but he's a familiar name. What those guys look like. You mentioned Dickinson coming in. So, sometimes with a new pitching coach, it really clicks, and sometimes maybe those guys get lost in the shuffle and somebody takes their spot. So that'll be fascinating for me. Offensively, just figuring out what it looks like. I know that Cam Durnan looks like an impact transfer who's going to come in and be a catalyst in the lineup. Is Caden Pierre ready to take a step and be a one of the top SEC outfielders, right? A guy like Chris Patterson, who was really good at times last year as a freshman, certainly talented. Is he ready to take the next step? I do feel like there are pieces there that can make Missouri really interesting, and the finding out how they look, especially early in the year in the pre-conference, are they able to not drop those games like they did last year that had us kind of on alert? Are they able to show that and kind of flex and act like an SEC program early in the year? I think just having that confidence and having that success will pay. That I think that's going to be a huge key as we look forward to them heading into conference play, because it won't be as bad as last year. How could it be? But I am curious, how much better is it? Because this league is so unforgiving. You had 13 regional teams, and A&M was a Missouri series away from being a 14, and then South Carolina, who we'll talk about in subsequent episodes. They look to be much improved, at least from a roster standpoint. So everybody's getting better. So Missouri could be better. Where are those wins going to come from? And that's, for me, is listening to what you talk about. I feel like from a pitching standpoint, that's where it starts, and that's certainly what bit them a year ago primarily. But I am curious to see from an offensive standpoint. If they need to win an 8-7 game, are they going to be able to do that against an SEC kind of pitching staff?
Yeah, you nailed it, because you just can't ask any pitching staff in the SEC. You can't ask them to go out and try to win a 4-2 game every week,
right?
Every day. You just can't. You can't ask them to do that. So you're going to have to win games high scoring on occasion, and what they're betting on, if you put it into one sentence, what they're betting on is the combination of the incoming transfers and the guys that have been in this program for several years, the Mateo Cernas, Pierre Seals, Cameron Benson, like that whole group of guys, Caden Pierre, of course, that the combination of those new guys and those guys that have been in this program and should be the leaders at this point,
right,
being good enough to get that done. And I think the offense will be better. It's just a matter of how much. So we'll see. All right. Let's do a little roundup, Mark, of some of the action that we've seen in exhibition games. We won't spend too much time on any particular result here, but a couple storylines from each. And then, of course, I should mention it. Mark and I will be going to more and more exhibitions as the fall goes on. We're unleashing Mark this weekend for the first time this fall. I'll be out in coming up weeks, so we'll have plenty more longer segments on teams as time goes on. But for this we're just going to kind of fly by some stuff. Let's start with Texas, Mark. First off, they beat Texas Tech 9-3. Dell Diamond and Round Rock. Also, shout out to Texas Tech. Their two fall games were against Texas in Round Rock, and they're about to play, or maybe did play. No, I guess they haven't played that yet. Right. Yeah, Oklahoma at Globe Life Field. Like, talk about a team that really just went all in on their fall games. So shout out to Texas Tech. But Texas wins at 9-3. They also lost to Lamar 11-5. Positionally, what's interesting to me is that in that Texas Tech game, Adrian Rodriguez started at shortstop. I think we all kind of assumed Timo Becerra would be the shortstop, and he still might be, right? Because I believe he played shortstop in the Lamar game, although I could be wrong about that. So he still might be the shortstop, but it would seem to me that would make the most sense, because I'm not really sure if Timo Becerra is not going to be your shortstop on this team. I'm not really sure what his value is, because he's a decent scrappy hitter, but he's not really an impact offensive player. And if you're going to have him in a regular role, it seems to me you'd want him at shortstop. So we'll see how that plays out. And then Aiden Robbins is the other. I mean, he's been the guy we thought he would be. Like, he just hits and hits and hits. And it seems like he has not missed a beat coming over from Seton Hall, at least in his in the two exhibitions so far.
Yeah, I think with Aiden Robbins, he could be one of the players, top players in the conference. He really is off to that kind of start in the fall, carrying over from the summer. He's going to hit, second, third in that lineup, depending on what they want to do with Rodriguez. And he's such a big part of Texas's middle of the lineup. I would say the 1 through 4, 5, they're going to be able to match up with everybody. After that is going to be the question. How do they lengthen that lineup? What does it look like? Is 6 through 9 going to match up with some of the other teams in the conference? And I think for me, that's the question on Texas. I don't have questions on their pitching staff. They have so many different options, so many talented guys. They have the returnees from last year who were good. Texas had one of the best pitching staffs in the conference, certainly by results last year. But they have some freshmen who've come in and newcomers who've come in who are more talented than the guys who pitched a year ago. So how do you blend that? And I feel like that's going to be the one of the areas that we focus on when we're looking at Texas early next year to see what roles people have. There's so much depth on that pitching staff. What is Dylan Belantis? He was all SEC freshman of the year as a closer. Is he your Friday starter? Right? What does that look like? He has not pitched in either of the exhibition games. What's his role going to look like? And then some of the freshmen have just been, I guess, dominant is fair to say. It's short stints. It's an inning here and it's an inning there. But you got to be bullish on, what Max is going to do with those young arms. The more time he gets to spend with them, and they're already so talented. So for me, Texas looks like one of the better. If they were SEC champs last year, they're going to be one of a top 5 kind of club again, depending on how some other teams shake out. And it starts on the mound. And I think if they can figure out how to lengthen that lineup, that's a team that can win it all. They've got everything's in place, the coaching staff, the support from the administration, the roster, the experience. They got a lot of those players have won. They won a year ago. This is you got to be excited if you're a Texas baseball fan, because it's shaping up as a really cool year.
It struck me as you were talking that Aiden Robbins might have, and don't compare the bodies of these two players, but like Aiden Robbins could be like a Sonny DeShera type transfer. And obviously, again, I said, don't compare. It's very different body types. But in terms of guy who just hits his way to being one of the best players in the country, relatively limited defensive value. Not that neither of them are stiffs, but just, they're not standout defenders. Maybe Robbins will give you a little something on the bases, but they're there to just hit. And we learned pretty quickly, this Sonny DeShera guy, like, it doesn't matter that he's coming up from Samford. Like, he can just really hit. And I think Aiden Robbins might be that same type of player where it's just, it doesn't matter if it's the Big East or the SEC or the American League West, like he just might just be one of those guys that just hits. So that very well could be. Let's talk Ole Miss. Ole Miss 12, Little Rock 2. Also shout out to Little Rock for their 2 games being, Arkansas and Ole Miss. Certainly that's I talked to Chris Curry about it, and, he just thinks this is what the fall is for. You got to find out where your flaws are and you maybe get some bruises and come back from them. So kudos to them. My note here is that, Cade Townsend pitched well, and Cade Townsend kind of strikes me as the type of guy. They've got some transfers that I think are going to be in the mix in the rotation, but, Cade Townsend's going to be a guy they're going to lean on to fill in behind Hunter Elliott, because you kind of know what you're going to get with him, obviously, but you're going to need guys behind him. And Cade Townsend has felt like a little bit of a next in line candidate, and certainly small sample fall. I get it, but he looked really good in that outing.
Hunter Elliott hasn't pitched this fall, so you're looking for guys to fill in after him. And I do think that with the way Townsend threw, they got Owen Kelly. You got to like what he's done, and Oh man, I'm blanking on the kid's name. Let me look at it real quick. It's freshman Grayson Gibson is a pitcher to watch. Just a kid that just an advanced freshman, maybe not as elite stuff as some of the other guys, but just kind of he's ready to come in and make an impact. I think offensively, one of the interesting parts for me is you got Will Furness and Judd Udemark back. Probably weren't sure that they were going to be back. Certainly could have lost either of them. Big bats. Austin Foley, another big bat. The middle of the lineup should be really strong. And then, you pick up Dom Decker, the Murray State transfer. He's going to play somewhere. Maybe he's at second. Maybe he's leading off, that kind of thing. I think this is a lineup that could be really, really strong. The question for me, just like for Texas, is what does 6 through 9 look like? And if they figure that out, and they certainly did that last year, Ole Miss could be right back in the mix where they were a year ago, maybe even better, because they've got some guys that had a taste of winning a year ago that can parlay that into future success.
Let's move on to Kentucky, which had one of the weirdest results. They beat West Virginia on aggregate 26-10.
Right.
That was a 9-8 game and a 17-2 game. And then in the 9-8 game, they were down, I believe it was 7-1 early in that thing. And you could take that a couple different ways. One is, if you talk to coaches with these fall exhibitions, when you're playing like competition, and I would say West Virginia is like competition, and you are mostly concerned with how did you look when your best guys ran against their best guys.
Mm-hmm.
And in that regard, not great for Kentucky, right? Early in the game. But West Virginia's depth is pretty good too. So it's not like when Kentucky made that huge comeback, it's not like they were facing off against a bunch of guys who could never pitch at a power conference level. Like those are still pretty good pitchers. And so I think if you're Nick Mingione, who I read a quote from Aaron, because Arian Fit was there, it said something like, he was actually kind of happy to see his guys get punched in the mouth a little bit, and then come back from that. So, and then of course in the second game, they just steamrolled West Virginia. So, and I think that's a positive, just that their depth proved to be so much better, at least on this day, than West Virginia's depth. Ryan Schwartz was a guy I wanted to highlight there. Hit a grand slam in that exhibition, and he's a guy that if you're not reading it, you should. A great newsletter, Batcat Central, done by Derek Terry, former D1 baseball intern Derek Terry, and he's doing great scrimmage recaps, even just the inter squad scrimmages. And it seems like Ryan Schwartz's name comes up in every single one of them as somebody who's swinging the bat really well. And he's a guy, I think, coming into the fall, you thought, he played well at the end of last year. Like maybe he's a fourth outfielder, maybe he's a DH, maybe he's somebody who ends up playing 50 games, but it's in like 3 different spots. But I think at this point he's played his way into probably being a starting outfielder, just with the way he swung the bat. So, and the outfield, I think in general, is something for Kentucky that I think I'm excited to see, because you've got him out there. You've got Jay Starnish, the St. Bonaventure transfer, who's a really dynamic, he can run, he can hit for power. You've got the USC Upstate transfer, Scott Campbell, who I really like. And that's in addition to some of the guys they had coming back from last year, like a Will Marcy, for example, a guy they were really high on and then dealt with an injury and just never got back. So the depth is really good there. So that's a unit that stands out for me. But Ryan Schwartz, I think, is kind of the MVP of the fall so far, if you will, just with what he's done offensively.
I don't have questions about Kentucky. They've proven it to me that they're going to bring in guys that fit their system, and they're going to be able to put it together and pester the heck out of every opponent that they face. The question for me is, I really love their pitching staff. How good can it be? Can it be just an elite pitching staff, one of the best in the country? And if that's the case, we're talking about another trip to Omaha and, hosting supers and that kind of thing. Jackson Jokin is one of the keys to that. I mean, it's a tremendous arm. Missed last year with injury. He's been at Nebraska, at Houston. He's well traveled, so he's in a position where he can come out and he can match up, stuff wise with anyone Kentucky's going to face. Is the question is what's it going to look like from a consistency standpoint? Can he continue to hit the spot? You got Ben Cleaver. Excuse me. Nate Harris. I mean, Jack Bennett. You got Connor Madison. There are plenty of options. I don't know what that rotation is going to look like, and I do feel like they've got a chance to from a depth standpoint and from a pure talent standpoint. And a lot of times you don't have both. You may have one or the other. I think this might be, this, at least on paper, heading into the spring, this might be Kentucky's best pitching staff that they've had, at least, in my recent memory. So that's fascinating to me, because if you've got that sort of staff, you're in every game. And with the offense that this club has proven that they know how to do, they're going to manufacture stuff. And with this lineup, I think they're going to hit some bombs as well. This could be a really good team. And this is a team that after, 2 years ago they tied for the SEC title, took a step back last year, was still made the regional. And I feel like this is that rebound that they're, with the top teams in the conference, and there are a lot of good ones. I think this one's going to have a case to be considered up there with the best in the country. Now we'll see, but certainly on paper, I'm buying.
Totally agree. I'm glad you said that. I think there's going to be some folks. I can see it now. We're going to get some questions about them in the preseason, because I think they're going to be ranked higher than some more casual fans realize. Yeah. Folks that are maybe they follow their team but don't really follow the rest of it. Like, I go back to last year's team, and I don't mean this disrespectfully. Like, last year's team, not that talented, and they got to a regional and made some noise in a regional. And there was not that long ago, and I've said this before, I sound like a broken record, but the history of Kentucky baseball is such that you have these highs. In the past, a high was just getting to a regional, and then you'd immediately have this fall off in a rebuild. Well, if the down years are now finishing about 500 in the league and getting to a regional, like, that's a much better place than where they've been. And so, and then your highs get higher. And I think I'm with you. Like, I don't, the College World Series team is always going to be like a certainly a high bar to reach, but talent wise, maybe this one's better. We'll see. I think
if there's the mound. Yeah, I think on the mound. I mean,
but I think even on the position player side, really though, it was. And maybe we'll end up with a guy like Ryan Waldschmidt that just flies up to the big leagues and turns out to be this guy that we think of differently as time goes on. But like Tyler Bell is a guy who turned down second round money.
Yeah.
Owen Jenkins, a freshman catcher, is a guy who turned down real money. Like, he's a top 5 round draft pick guy who decided to go to Kentucky. With Tyler Bell and Luke Lawrence back, is that not in the neighborhood of Emilian Pitre and Grant Smith? I mean, Pitre was the better player there in terms of so that's flipped now. Bell's the better guy, but like, is that not a similar defensive middle infield to what they had before? Yeah, right.
I would agree.
So I don't know ultimately, and there are some X factors. You lose Devin Burks, who wasn't always the most productive hitter, but was kind of a glue of that whole operation. So how has that felt? But I'm with you on the mound. I'll leave it on this. Like, they have multiple things in the rotation that they just haven't had in a while. Yeah. We've talked about Jackson Jelkin. He's got stuff that Kentucky has not had at the front of the rotation since Zach Thompson. Mm-hmm. And in Ben Cleaver, excuse me, they have a proven guy in the SEC that they haven't had since not even Zach Thompson, because Zach Thompson came off of a year before his draft year that was just so, and I think he had an injury and there were some things going on, but I can't remember the last time that Kentucky's had a guy who was proven SEC quality of what Ben Cleaver is and then been back the next year. Like, I honestly don't remember the last time they had that. And so that's your starting point. And then you mentioned it. You got a guy who earned his way into the rotation as a freshman in Nate Harris. You've got a guy in Bennett who was the Friday starter on a regional team at Western Kentucky as the midweek guy, at least on paper. That's crazy. So I say all that to say, to come around to my original point. Like, if you are still living in this world where you kind of expect Kentucky to just go back to being little old baseball Kentucky, Like we're living in a different world now. Like they are probably going to be ranked. They're going to be pushed up pretty high in our preseason rankings, and rightfully so. Like this team is super talented. They're maybe not as sexy as some other teams, right? They don't necessarily have just the depth of those types of names, but they might have some first round picks on the roster, so they're not that far off from those teams. So anyway, we'll move on, but I think you and I are on the same page about Kentucky, and I think we're both, I would buy your Kentucky stock for 2026 right now while the price is still reasonable. All right, let's talk A&M, Mark. Couple games for them. 22-7 over Sam Houston, 8-4 over TCU. 6,000 fans at Bluebell Park for that game between A&M and TCU. That is a fall crowd, folks. Mostly focusing on that TCU game. A&M held the Horned Frogs scoreless through 8 innings pitched. That's pretty impressive stuff there. Also, middle infielders, freshmen in the mix there. Nico Partita, who's played some second. Boston Kellner has played some short and some second. They're both freshmen. Partita can maybe also play third. Ben Royo will be in the mix there, a veteran who's back. He'll also be in the mix of those positions. So it's not set in stone that those two freshmen are going to be in the middle infield, but there's also a non-zero chance A&M goes out there on opening day with freshmen starting in the middle infield.
And isn't it great to have that I guess those players talented enough that you can play them because they've proven it, but you don't have to play them.
Right. They're not doing it for a lack of options.
Yeah, you do have some other options. And, Travis Chestnut back for his 83rd year, and you got Royo. So you got some veterans for these guys to learn from. So I feel like I'm kind of bullish on A&M right now. And the reason I say that is I think they're going to hit. When you got Sorrell, you got Grahovic, you got Keel, you got Harrison. We talked about the freshmen. They're going to hit. I just feel like they are. They're going to have one of the deeper lineups, and it's going to be really talented. The questions I had on the mound, and Weston Moss has been really good, but I think that the surprising one for me has been Aiden Sims. I mean, he's thrown 4 innings and 4 hitless innings, two each in the exhibition. Just been, he was kind of a midweek guy at times a year ago, and sometimes it just clicks, man. And that to me, when you throw Shane Sadeo back in, who missed last year with an injury, he was a starter on their College World Series team from 2 years ago. This is a club with a lot of scary pitching potential, and they still got to go do it, and they still got to find some other depth pieces and things of that nature. Not as deep as a Texas, not as deep as an Arkansas or an LSU, but you don't have to be if you can find 7-8 guys that you can live with. I think A&M, because their offense is going to be so good, and those 6 or 7 might be, they may be able to match up with anybody. This is a team that on paper looks pretty good. Now, the obvious caveat to that is they were even better on paper a year ago, and the rug came out from under them. So how do you deal with that, right? Are you able to focus on what went wrong a year ago, and how do you not repeat those things? That's going to be the big question. As we head into the spring with A&M, it's after last year, there's going to be a lot of doubters. So even no one's going to doubt the talent this year. It's going to be, what does the production look like? And I feel like that they're in a position, at least on paper, where they're going to go in and, we're not going to pick them last in the conference. We're not going to pick them 14th where they finished last year. They're going to be higher than that. But can they live up to that and return to where A&M expects to be as a baseball program?
Yeah, for me, it boils down to the question of, does the scar tissue help or hurt? Because, they got beat up last year, and does it galvanize them, and put them in a position where they want to prove who they actually are, especially with, for their head coach who is taking over in a unique set of circumstances, or at the first sign of trouble, do things get dicey, right? Like here we go again. We'll see. Certainly talent will not be a problem once again. So we'll be watching closely. All right. Last one is Vanderbilt. They split 2 games with Utah out on the West Coast. Kudos to Vanderbilt. They always hit the road for at least one of their fall exhibitions. I like that. I think it's a smart idea. So kudos to them. You had noted this, Mark. I think it is notable. Tommy Gooden, batting cleanup. Redshirt freshman, first baseman. Obviously, it's a Vanderbilt lineup that's always kind of seeking more thump. Could that be part of that? I'm also watching closely the outfield. They just don't have a lot of outfielders, like full stop. Mm-hmm. You're going to have some guys who are listed on the roster as infielders, probably transition a little bit, whether it's Mike Mancini, or if Brody Johnston's not the shortstop, do you move Brody Johnston to the outfield? Braden Holcomb, is he like a center fielder? He's a better athlete than you think. Yeah. He shows that every summer in the Cape Cod League when he steals a bunch of bases. I don't think anybody, even in that clubhouse, really has the answers right now on who's going to be the starting outfield at Vanderbilt. So that's kind of the position I'm watching. I guess I'm also watching shortstop because I also think there's a scenario where Brody Johnston plays shortstop. Now, Riker Waite had a good summer in the Cape Cod League. There's a lot of buzz about him right now. He's high on our prospect list here at D1 Baseball, led by David Seifert. So I think he's the incumbent there. But is there a scenario where Brody Johnston also plays from shortstop? I think that's also on the table. So a couple positions I'm watching there, but the outfield for me is the one where it's just you're going to have to transition somebody probably, and how well does that go ultimately?
Yeah, especially because you don't really know, who can play center field. That's to me. They've got a freshman, Colin Brightwell, who started both games against Utah as a chance to be a factor. Cade Sears, who's the rare junior college transfer that Vandy takes. You probably don't take him unless there's a chance he can help you there. I feel like those are 2 new players. You mentioned some of the other ones. I think the other thing, Mike Rooney was at the game and he was really impressed with Colin Barzey, catcher. He could offensively. He's always had the potential. He's really toolsy, and it looks like he's putting it together. And also, just offensively, he's just continuing to develop. Could be a real difference maker for them. And if he becomes, the middle of the lineup kind of guy, along with who they have coming back with Holcomb and Johnston, and they brought in John Stone, two of them, Logan and Carter, 2 brothers, who could also be middle of the lineup kind of guys. Vanderbilt could have a little more thump than potentially they've had in a few years, and I think that would be welcome for those close to the program. It's really hard to scrap your way and win every game, even regardless of how good your pitching is. It's nice to have that cushion, and have a couple of guys that can several guys that can leave the yard and give you that easy 3-run bomb instead of having to get 5 hits to score 3 runs. And I feel like that's where the game is right now. And Vanderbilt certainly could use a little more thought. And it looks like at least the potential is there. We'll see what materializes. I think the other thing is what is, pitching wise, Connor Fennell was one of the breakout stars a year ago. What does he look like? And Austin Nye has had a really good fall from all indications. He was super talented freshman a year ago. He just continued to get better as the year went on. Pitched really well, and Hoover could be he and Fennell could be a great 1-2 punch atop that rotation that can allow them to match up with anyone. And then they've got some freshmen like Aiden Stillman, Connor Hamilton that were big draft guys who made it to school. A lot of people didn't expect that. What will their roles be? We've always seen it. A lot of times Vandy has this really talented freshman and they stick him in midweek and just kind of let him grow. I could certainly see a piggyback situation with those 2 guys doing that while someone else takes that Sunday spot, but behind the two guys we mentioned. I think for me, Vanderbilt, after the way that last year was such a roller coaster for them, we'll just say a mediocre first part of the year, and then they found it, and we're just in fuego down the stretch. Number one overall seed. Not sure that they were the best team in the country, but they were playing like it, and they had the resume and they had the RPI and the big wins and all of that. And then they go and they have the struggle in regional play and lose at home. So what do you take from that, right? There was a lot of positives that you'd like to continue and reinforce those, but then you get to regional play and you struggle. So what can you do differently, and how do you, and they aren't alone. There were a lot of SEC teams that didn't fare as well in regionals this past year. What can you take from that? Because it's one thing to build your lineup and your pitching staff for the 56 game regular season, and it's still another to make sure that you handle the regional format and people handle we'll just say the ramped up pressure. You lose, you're done. So what does Vandy, what does this year's Vandy or next year's Vandy look like using those lessons from a year ago? And I think that for me that's what I want to see, right? Because when we talk with Coach Corbin and some of the members close to that program, that was such a demoralizing defeat. Being able to flush that and remember all those positives that put you in that position to begin with, and being able to elevate from that. I think, it's kind of, because Texas the same way. Great regular season, did not fare well in regional play. Ole Miss didn't make it out of a regional, so Georgia. So all these teams that had great regular seasons, what do you do? Or maybe it's just bad luck, right? But how do you adapt, or at least account for what happened a year ago, and can you do something different to put yourself in a better position?
Let's get the folks out of here, Mark. Let us know what you got coming up, because like I said, we are unleashing you this weekend. What's on your fall baseball schedule to get us ready for get the listeners ready for what we're going to be talking about on our next episode?
Yeah, lots of time in the truck. I'll be going to Tuscaloosa Friday night. Alabama is hosting Lipscomb in an exhibition, so that'll be my first look at Alabama. Be interesting to see a lot of those freshmen. What would that lineup look like? Because they brought in a bunch of transfers too. That could be a really interesting team to see how they line up and two pitches. And then Saturday, I'm heading down to Pensacola, Florida State, and playing Mississippi State. Sold out at the minor league park there. Should be a great environment from a Mississippi State standpoint. So many transfers, so many impact freshmen. What does their lineup look like? Jack Bauer, does he come in and throw three digits? What's his role? What is it? Just trying to get a feel for what will Mississippi State style look like, compared to what was under Chris Lamonis a year ago. And then also on Sunday, I'll head to Troy and watch an inter squad there. They've released their schedule on Wednesday. Lots of SEC teams on their roster. They play Alabama, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, Georgia. So there'll be some. So that's a good mid-major, so I'll get a chance to see them as well. And that's the fun part about this, and what I really love about D1 is between all of us on staff, we're going to see how many we should count up how many teams we actually lay eyes on in the fall, because it's a really hefty number, a big percentage of the sport. And not only will we have interviews with coaches for our fall reports, we'll actually see them in person, and I do feel like that helps when the spring comes around. What a guy looks like, how he moves, what pitches he throws. I think that you build a connection, and I do feel like that's a huge benefit as we head into this with our spring coverage.
Yeah, I'm not just saying this. It is true that this is something that gets said, that our fall reports, I hear time and again, are the most valuable thing that we do as far as when it comes to getting people ready for what ultimately ends up happening during the season, because it is really our best chance to see the entire roster and talk about the entire roster, especially now, right? Like, we're gone are the days, with a few exceptions, of the 40 some odd man fall roster, right? Like, most teams aren't doing that anymore with the new roster limitations. There are a few, but for the most part, the rosters are a little slimmer these days. And so we are talking about pretty much everybody on the roster in these fall reports. And so, if you want to not, better your knowledge not only of your own team, but also of the teams in the conference, your team's rivals, whether that's in conference or out of conference, the fall reports are the way to go. We do have a coupon code. If you're watching our video, you can see it scrolling there, D1 Fall 25. That gets you 30% off your subscription package. So if you're on the fence looking to jump in, use that coupon code D1 Fall 25 to get yourself 30% off just in time for the bulk of fall report season. That's going to be here in the next couple of weeks. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. I want to thank Academy Sports and Outdoors for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover for the better part of a year at this point. Those guys have been on board with us, and we appreciate it. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listener, for listening. We'll talk to y'all soon.